My family called me a failure and kicked me off our ranch, but when they saw my $1 million empire, they begged me to come home. You know that feeling when everyone expects you to be someone you're not? Yeah, that was my whole life until last year. I'm David, 35 years old, and I've been living a lie on my family's cattle ranch in East Texas for longer than I care to admit. Most folks around here think a real man should know the difference between a carburetor and a transmission, should be able to field dress a deer without flinching, and should never, ever show emotion unless it's anger or pride. Me? I was the guy reading philosophy books behind the barn, while my brothers were racing four-wheelers through the mud. Don't get me wrong, I worked the ranch. Had to. Dad made sure of that. But while my brothers Jake and Tommy were out there talking horsepower and hunting stories, I was the weirdo who noticed how the morning mist smelled different in October than it did in July. I was the one who could tell you which wildflowers were blooming just by walking past a field with my eyes closed. My dad, Big Jim Morrison, and yes, he actually went by Big Jim like this was some kind of Western movie, never understood me. He'd look at me the same way you'd look at a broken transmission, like something that needed fixing, but probably wasn't worth the trouble. The only person who ever got me was Grandma Mabel. She lived in the old farmhouse with us until she passed last year, and that woman was pure magic. While Dad was teaching my brothers how to fix fence posts, Grandma was teaching me about herbs and scents and how certain smells could take you back in time faster than any photo album. She made candles by hand, not those fancy store-bought ones, but real candles that smell like memories. Her kitchen always had this warm, honey-like scent mixed with lavender and something I could never quite identify. Something that just smelled like home. Every evening after dinner, she'd sit at her little wooden table by the window, melting wax and mixing scents like she was conducting some kind of aromatic symphony. I'd watch her work, mesmerized by how she could take something as simple as wax and turn it into pure nostalgia. She used to tell me that scents were like invisible time machines. Light the right candle, and suddenly you're 8 years old in your grandmother's kitchen again, or you're on your first date, or you're saying goodbye to someone you love. She said some people collect coins or stamps, but she collected moments and trapped them in wax. When Grandma passed last spring, something broke in our house. Not just because we missed her, though God knows we did, but because suddenly there was this huge empty space where all that warmth and understanding used to be. That's when I got the idea that would change everything. The old storage shed behind the main house had been sitting empty since Grandma died. It still smelled like her, that mixture of lavender and old wood, and something indefinably comforting. I walked in there one afternoon in late September, and it hit me like a truck. This was where I belonged. I could set up a workshop, learn Grandma's craft, make candles the way she did, with love and patience and all those mysterious ingredients she never wrote down anywhere. I could honor her memory and maybe, just maybe, find my own place in this family. So I did what any reasonable 35-year-old man would do. I asked my dad if I could use the shed. Big mistake. You'd have thought I asked him if I could paint my nails and wear a dress to church. The man went redder than a prize bull, and his voice got that dangerous quiet tone that meant someone was about to get their feelings hurt real bad. He told me that making candles wasn't man's work, that if I wanted to play with wax and flowers, I should find somewhere else to do it, that he didn't raise his son to waste time on such nonsense when there was real work to be done. But here's the thing that really got to me. It wasn't just Dad. When he started yelling, my brothers showed up like they could smell drama from a mile away. They were grinning like this was the best entertainment they'd had all week. Jake, who's 37 and still thinks fart jokes are hilarious, started making these exaggerated sniffing motions and asking if I was going to start selling essential oils next. Tommy, who's 29 and has never read a book that wasn't about football, wondered out loud if I was going through some kind of midlife crisis. But the moment that really broke my heart was watching my mom. She was standing in the kitchen doorway, close enough to hear everything but not saying a word. I could see her hands clenched into fists at her sides, and for the first time in my life, I realized she was angry, not at me, at them, at the whole situation. Mom had always been the peacekeeper, the one who smoothed things over when Dad got too harsh or when us boys fought too hard. But standing there watching her son get torn apart for wanting to honor his grandmother's memory, something was different in her eyes. That night, Dad made it crystal clear that as long as I was living under his roof, I'd focus on ranch work and quit this ridiculous candle nonsense. He said if I couldn't be the son he raised me to be, maybe I needed to figure out how to be that son somewhere else. You know what's funny about ultimatums? Sometimes they clarify things in ways you never expected. I'd been feeling trapped on that ranch for years, going through the motions of being someone I wasn't, waiting for permission to become who I actually was. Dad's anger didn't hurt because it was cruel. It hurt because it was honest. He was finally saying out loud what I'd suspected my whole life. I didn't fit the Morrison family mold. So I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I told him I'd be gone by the weekend. You should have seen their faces. Dad looked like he'd been slapped. Jake and Tommy stopped laughing real quick. And Mom looked like she was about to cry. I think they expected me to back down, to apologize and promise to be a better son. Instead, I walked out to the back 40 where we kept all our old junk and found my salvation, a 1995 Airstream trailer that I'd bought during my brief college rebellion phase. It had been sitting in the weeds for over a decade, looking like a giant silver bullet that had crash-landed in our pasture. But it was mine, paid for with money I'd earned working construction during summer breaks. And suddenly it represented the freedom I'd been craving my whole adult life. The next 3 days were the longest of my life. Dad didn't speak to me. Jake and Tommy acted like I was invisible. But Mom started doing these little things, bringing me extra coffee in the morning, making sure my favorite cookies appeared on the kitchen counter, leaving clean laundry folded on my bed without saying a word. And then there was Sarah, my little sister. She's 26, married with 2 kids, but she's always been the smartest one in our family. While everyone else was either ignoring me or treating me like I'd lost my mind, Sarah was watching everything with those sharp eyes of hers. The night before I was supposed to leave, she knocked on my bedroom door. When I opened it, she was holding a cardboard box that looked like it had seen better days. She didn't say much. Sarah never was one for big speeches. She just handed me the box and said it was some of Grandma's things that she thought I should have. Then she hugged me tight and whispered that Grandma would be proud of me for being brave enough to be myself. I waited until Sarah left before I opened that box, and when I did, I nearly lost it completely. Inside was Grandma's old notebook, the one she used to scribble in while she worked. The pages were yellowed and smelled like vanilla and old paper, covered with her careful handwriting recording every experiment, every success, every beautiful failure. There were recipes for scents I remembered and some I'd never heard of. Sunday morning pancakes, first day of school, rainy afternoon reading. Each one had notes about which wax to use, how long to let it cure, what memories it was supposed to evoke. But that wasn't the most incredible part. At the bottom of the box was one of her old candle molds, a simple tin cylinder that had been dented and redented over the years. It was the same mold she'd used to make my favorite candle, one she called Growing Upright. I used to light it whenever I felt lost or scared, and somehow it always made everything seem manageable. And then I found the letter. It was in an envelope with my name written in Grandma's shaky handwriting, sealed with a little piece of tape that had turned yellow with age. My hands were trembling as I opened it, because somehow I knew that whatever was inside was going to change everything. The letter was short, maybe half a page, but every word hit me like a revelation. She wrote that she'd always known I was different from the other boys, but different in the best possible way. She said I had what she called a sensitive soul, the ability to notice beauty and meaning in places where other people only saw ordinary things. She told me that making candles wasn't about the wax or the wicks or even the scents. It was about capturing moments of joy and comfort and love, then sharing them with people who needed a little light in their darkness. But the line that absolutely destroyed me in the best possible way was at the very end. You've always burned bright in your own way, David. Don't let anyone blow out that flame. I sat there on my childhood bed, holding that letter, and cried like I hadn't cried since I was 12 years old. Not because I was sad, but because for the first time in my life, I felt truly understood. Grandma had known. She'd known that I didn't fit the family pattern, and instead of seeing that as a problem, she'd seen it as a gift. She'd known that someday I'd need permission to be myself, and she'd found a way to give it to me even after she was gone. That night, I packed everything that mattered into 2 duffel bags and a cardboard box. The trailer was going to need some work. The tires were flat, the electrical system was questionable, and there was a family of possums who'd made themselves a home in the bathroom. But it was mine, and it was going to take me wherever I needed to go. The next morning, I hitched that old Airstream to my pickup truck. While the sun was still coming up, Dad was already out checking on the cattle, and I could see him in the distance, pretending not to notice what I was doing. Mom came out with a thermos of coffee and a bag of sandwiches. She didn't say anything, just hugged me tight and whispered that she loved me. When she pulled back, I could see tears in her eyes, but she was smiling too. Jake and Tommy watched from the porch, not laughing anymore. I think reality was starting to hit them. Their weird little brother was actually leaving, and suddenly it didn't seem as funny as it had a few days ago. But it was Sarah's goodbye that nearly broke my resolve. She walked me to the truck and handed me a $20 bill, telling me it was from my first batch of candles. Then she looked me right in the eye and said something I'll never forget. Grandma always said the bravest thing you can do is disappoint the right people. As I drove away from the only home I'd ever known, pulling that beat-up trailer behind me like some kind of middle-aged runaway, I caught sight of my reflection in the rear-view mirror. For the first time in years, I looked like myself. I didn't know where I was going or how I was going to survive, or whether I was making the biggest mistake of my life. All I knew was that I had Grandma's notebook, her old mold, and her blessing to burn bright in my own way. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find out who you really are. And sometimes the people who love you most are the ones brave enough to let you go. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was mine. And for the first time since Grandma died, I could smell possibility in the air. So there I was, driving down I-35 with everything I owned rattling around behind me in a trailer that looked like it belonged in a museum of bad life choices. The first thing you learn about freedom is that it's a lot less glamorous than the movies make it seem. The second thing you learn is that possums apparently know how to pick locks. I'd been planning to head straight to Austin. Figure a city that prided itself on being weird might have room for one more misfit. But about 30 miles outside the city limits, my truck started making this grinding noise that sounded like a coffee grinder full of gravel. Turns out, when you haven't driven a vehicle in 10 years, you should probably check things like oil levels and tire pressure before attempting a cross-state relocation. The breakdown happened right next to a sign that read Shady Oaks Mobile Home Community, where life slows down. Looking back, I think the universe has a twisted sense of humor. There I was, having the automotive equivalent of a panic attack, and the only place to pull over was a trailer park that looked like it had been decorated by someone who really, really loved plastic flamingos. The manager, a woman named Dolores who wore more jewelry than Mr. T and had a kind of Texas accent that could cut glass, took one look at my situation and offered me a monthly spot for $300. Cash only, no questions asked, but the Wi-Fi was included and there was a Waffle House within walking distance. When you're 35 years old and suddenly homeless, your standards adjust pretty quickly. Plus, the place had character, and by character, I mean every trailer looked like its owner had given up on conventional aesthetics and decided to embrace pure chaos instead. My first night in Shady Oaks, I lay on the built-in bed that felt like it was stuffed with broken dreams and old newspapers, listening to my neighbor's dog bark at absolutely nothing, while someone else practiced what I can only assume was death metal accordion. That's when reality hit me. I had maybe $800 in my name, no job prospects, and a serious gap in my resume that basically read, spent 15 years pretending to be someone else. But you know what they say about rock bottom. It gives you a solid foundation to build on. The next morning, I walked into every business within a 5-mile radius and did something I'd never done before. I told the truth about who I was. Not the sanitized resume version of the truth, but the real deal. I was a guy who'd worked on a ranch his whole life, knew how to show up on time and work hard, and was looking for a fresh start. Turns out, Austin in the early 2000s was exactly the kind of place where being honest about your weird story was actually an advantage. Within a week, I had 3 part-time jobs that together almost added up to a living wage. Mornings, I was a barista at a coffee shop called The Grind, and yes, They thought that name was as clever as you're imagining. The owner, Marcus, was this former tech guy who burned out during the dot-com bubble and decided that making perfect espresso was more meaningful than debugging code. He taught me that coffee, like everything else worth doing, was about attention to details that most people never notice. The afternoon shift was teaching guitar lessons at a music store downtown. I'd been playing since high school, one of those skills you pick up when you're the weird kid who doesn't fit in with the football crowd. Turns out, there were a lot of people in Austin who wanted to learn 3 chords so they could play at open mic nights and feel like they were part of something creative. Weekends, I worked at a bike repair shop owned by this old hippie named Jerry who'd apparently been fixing bicycles since before bicycles were cool. Jerry had this theory that you could tell everything about a person by how they treated their bike. People who brought in expensive bikes but never rode them. People who rode their bikes into ground because they couldn't afford anything else. People who customized every component because the bike was an extension of their personality. Jerry also had this habit of paying me in cash and asking absolutely no questions about my living situation, which I appreciated more than he probably knew. Between the 3 jobs, I was working about 60 hours a week and sleeping maybe 5 hours a night. But for the first time in my adult life, I was earning money for being myself instead of pretending to be someone else. Every dollar I made felt like proof that maybe I wasn't as unemployable as my family thought. And then there were the evenings, after work, when most people were settling in for dinner and TV. I'd sit at the tiny table in my trailer with Grandma's notebook spread out in front of me, trying to decode her handwriting by the light of a desk lamp I'd bought at Goodwill for $12. Her notes were like poetry written in a language I was still learning. She'd write things like, add 3 drops of vanilla when the wax reaches the temperature of a summer afternoon, or stir clockwise while thinking of Sunday mornings. Half the time, I wasn't sure she was giving me technical instructions or life advice. My first attempt at candle making were disasters that would have made a middle school science fair judge weep. I melted wax in an old coffee can over my trailer's tiny stove, poured it into empty soup cans because I couldn't afford real molds, and used birthday candle wicks because I didn't know where to buy proper supplies. The results looked like something a toddler might make if you gave them access to the kitchen and no adult supervision. The wicks were too small, so the candles barely burned. The wax cooled unevenly, creating these weird crater-like formations. And the scents, well, let's just say that Sunday morning pancakes smelled more like Tuesday afternoon regret. But here's the thing about failing at something you actually care about. It's completely different from failing at something you're just going through the motions on. Every disaster taught me something. Every weird, lumpy, barely functional candle was a step closer to understanding what Grandma had been trying to show me. After about 6 weeks of producing what could generously be called abstract candle art, I finally made one that actually worked. It was supposed to be Apple Orchard Morning, a combination of apple and cinnamon with just a hint of something that smelled like dew on grass. When I lit that candle for the first time, sitting in my tiny trailer surrounded by the evidence of dozens of failures, something magical happened. The scent filled the space, and suddenly I wasn't in a rundown trailer park anymore. I was 8 years old, standing in Grandma's kitchen while she made pancakes on a Saturday morning, safe and loved and exactly where I belonged. That's when I understood what she'd been trying to tell me all those years. Candles weren't just about light or decoration. They were about creating moments of comfort and connection in a world that often felt cold and disconnected. I knew I had to share this feeling with other people. The next Saturday, I loaded up a cardboard box with my 12 least embarrassing candles and headed to the local flea market. If you've never tried to sell handmade goods to strangers, let me tell you, it's like performing comedy for an audience that hasn't decided whether they want to laugh or call security. My setup was pathetic. I had a card table borrowed from Dolores, a handwritten sign that said, handmade candles, $8 each, and the kind of nervous energy that probably made me look like I was either about to cry or run away. For the first 2 hours, people walked by like I was selling nuclear waste. A few stopped to look, picked up a candle, sniffed it politely, and moved on without saying anything. One guy asked if I had anything that smelled like bacon, and when I said no, he acted like I'd personally disappointed him and his entire family lineage. But then this elderly woman stopped at my table. She had silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, and a kind of gentle face that made you think of librarians and kindergarten teachers. She picked up one of my kitchen memory candles, apple cinnamon with a touch of vanilla, and held it close to her nose. The expression that crossed her face was exactly what I'd been hoping to see. Her eyes got soft and distant, like she was watching a movie that only she could see. She stood there for maybe 30 seconds, just breathing in the scent, and when she looked at me again, there were tears in her eyes. She told me it smelled exactly like her grandmother's kitchen in Kansas, where she spent summers as a child during the Depression. She bought 3 candles and gave me a $20 tip, saying it was the best money she'd spent in years. That's when I knew I was onto something. Word started getting around the flea market circuit. Not fast, and not in any dramatic way, but gradually people began seeking out the candle guy who made scents that reminded them of home. I wasn't getting rich. Most weeks I made maybe $50 or $60, which barely covered my materials, but I was creating something that mattered to people. I started experimenting with more complex scents, try to capture specific memories and emotions. First day of school, new crayons and autumn leaves. Saturday night date, aftershave and nervous excitement. Grandmother's attic, old books and lavender sachets. Some of them worked beautifully. Others smelled like I confused a candle recipe with a salad dressing recipe. But each experiment taught me something new about how scents could transport people different times and places. The breakthrough came about 3 months into my flea market career. I've been working on a scent I called Summer Evening Porch, trying to capture that specific smell of a Texas evening when the heat finally breaks and the night-blooming jasmine starts to open up. A woman in her 40s bought one on Saturday, and the next week she came back with her sister, her mother, and her teenage daughter. They bought 12 candles between them and started telling me stories about their family's old farmhouse, about evenings spent on the porch listening to their grandfather play harmonica while the women shelled peas, and talked about everything and nothing. That's when I realized I wasn't just selling candles. I was selling memories, connections, moments of peace in people's busy lives. Every customer who stopped to tell me a story about what my candles reminded them of was teaching me something new about the power of scent to bridge the gap between past and present. But the moment that changed everything happened on a rainy Sunday in November. I was having one of those days where nothing was going right. It had been drizzling since dawn, which meant hardly anyone was browsing the outdoor market. I'd sold exactly 2 candles by noon and was seriously considering packing up early when this woman appeared at my table like she materialized out of mist. She was probably in her early 30s, with long brown hair that she kept tucking behind her ears and the kind of clothes that suggested she shopped at thrift stores by choice rather than necessity. She moved through my display with the focused attention of someone who actually understood what she was looking at. After examining nearly every candle I had, she picked up one I'd labeled Quiet Morning, a subtle blend of cedar and vanilla with just a hint of something floral that I'd never been able to identify. She held it like it was precious, breathing in the scent with her eyes closed. When she opened her eyes, she was smiling in a way that made me think she'd just remembered something wonderful. She bought the candle, paid with exact change, and started to walk away. But then she stopped, turned back, and asked me something that completely caught me off guard. She wanted to know if I'd ever worked with lavender oil that had been grown and distilled by hand, because she had some that she thought might work perfectly with what I was doing. Her name was Ellie, and she lived in a converted school bus parked on a piece of land about 20 miles outside Austin. She grew herbs and distilled essential oils, selling them to local health food stores and farmers markets. Like me, she was someone who'd walked away from a conventional life to pursue something that most people thought was a little crazy. The next Saturday, she showed up at my table with a small glass bottle filled with the most incredible lavender oil I'd ever smelled. It wasn't just lavender. It was lavender with depth and complexity, with notes of earth and sunshine and something indefinably wild. She handed me the bottle like she was offering me a piece of her soul and said it was a gift because she believed in what I was doing. Then she walked away before I could properly thank her, leaving me standing there holding liquid magic and wondering if I'd just imagined the whole encounter. That night, I made a candle using Ellie's lavender oil combined with some vanilla and a touch of cedar. The result was something I'd never achieved before, a scent that was both comforting and mysterious, familiar and completely new. I called it Unexpected Gift. And when I lit it in my trail that evening, I realized that maybe the universe wasn't just playing tricks on me after all. Maybe it was actually trying to tell me something important. Sometimes the most beautiful things in life come from people who understand your weird passion and want to help you make it even weirder. And sometimes the best partnerships begin with a stranger who shows up on a rainy day and hands you exactly what you didn't know you needed. As I sat there in the soft glow of that perfect candle, breathing in the scent of possibility and new beginnings, I had this crazy thought. What if this was just the beginning of something bigger than I'd ever imagined? The next week, Ellie came back. This time, she didn't just buy a candle. She stayed to talk about scents and memories and the strange alchemy of turning raw materials into emotions, about living on the margins of conventional society and finding your tribe among other people who'd chosen the unconventional path. For the first time since leaving the ranch, I felt like I'd found someone who spoke my language. Someone who understood that creating something beautiful with your hands wasn't just a hobby or a side hustle. It was a way of making sense of the world. As we talked, I noticed other customers stopping longer at my table, drawn in by the energy of two people who were genuinely excited about what they were doing. Sales were better that day than they'd been in weeks, but more importantly, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Ellie bought 3 candles that day, but before she left, she did something that surprised me. She reached into her bag and pulled out another small bottle, this one filled with a blend she created specifically for me. She said it was her way of saying thank you for reminding her why she'd started working with scents in the first place. Then she smiled and walked away, leaving me holding another gift and feeling like my whole world was about to change again. That night, I sat in my trailer with Grandma's notebook open to a page where she'd written something I'd never fully understood before. The best candles are made when 2 flames come together to create something neither could make alone. Looking at those bottles of handcrafted oil, breathing in the lingering scent of possibility, I finally understood what she meant, and I had a feeling that my days of working alone were about to come to an end. You know how sometimes you meet someone and within 5 minutes you're planning world domination together? That's exactly what happened with Ellie. Except instead of taking over countries, we were plotting to take over people's emotional responses to household lighting. After that second weekend at the flea market, when she'd given me that custom oil blend, Ellie started showing up regularly, not just as a customer, but as someone who genuinely understood what I was trying to accomplish. She had this way of smelling one of my candles and immediately knowing what memory I was aiming for, then suggesting tiny adjustments that would make it perfect. Turns out, Ellie was 32, originally from Oregon, and had been living in her converted school bus for 3 years. She'd walked away from a marketing job in Portland because, in her words, she was tired of convincing people to buy things they didn't need with money they didn't have. Instead, she wanted to grow things that actually made people's lives better. Her setup was incredible. She'd park her bus on 5 acres of land owned by an old farmer who let her stay in exchange for helping with his organic vegetable operation. She'd turned half the land into an herb garden that looked like something out of a fairy tale. Rows of lavender and rosemary and plants I'd never heard of, all growing in perfect harmony. But here's what really blew my mind. Ellie had a gift for reading people's stories in their scent preferences. She could watch someone smell a candle and immediately understand what they were searching for. It was like she had some kind of emotional radar that could detect homesickness, loneliness, or nostalgia from 50 feet away. The first time she came to my trailer to see my operation, I was embarrassed. Here was someone who created this beautiful, intentional life, and I was showing her a space that looked like a chemistry experiment had collided with a college dorm room. But instead of judging, she started asking questions about my process, taking notes, and suggesting improvements. That's when she made the suggestion that changed everything. She thought we should collaborate on a line of what she called memory candles, scents specifically designed to capture universal childhood experiences that everyone could relate to, regardless of where they grew up. The idea was brilliant in its simplicity. Instead of making random pleasant scents, we'd create candles that told stories. Each one would be designed to transport people back to specific moments that felt like home, even if they'd never experienced that exact situation. We spent weeks developing the line, working in her bus with all the windows open, surrounded by herbs and essential oils and the kind of creative energy that makes you forget to eat or sleep. Ellie would describe a memory. I'd try to translate it into scent, and together we'd refine it until it felt absolutely perfect. Our first collection had 5 candles, each one targeting a different kind of nostalgia. Apple Bar Morning was designed to smell like autumn childhood. Fresh apples, hay, and that crisp air that makes you want to jump in leaf piles. We spent 3 days getting the balance right between the sweetness of apples and the earthiness of a working farm. Grandpa's Garage was probably the most challenging. How do you make motor oil and metal shavings smell comforting? Turns out, the secret was adding just a hint of coffee and old leather. The way a grandfather's work clothes might smell after years of weekend projects and quiet conversations. Church at 11 wasn't about religion. It was about that specific feeling of Sunday morning peace. We blended soft florals with old wood and something that smelled like pages from an ancient hymnal. It was comfort and reverence and the safety of routine all wrapped up in wax. Library 82 was Ellie's favorite. She'd spent her childhood summers in her grandmother's town library, and she wanted to capture that smell of old books, wooden shelves, and the quiet concentration of people lost in stories. We added just a touch of pencil shavings, and afternoon sunlight filtering through tall windows. Sawdust and pipe tobacco was my contribution, a tribute to the grandfather I'd never had but always imagined. It smelled like workshop wisdom and patient instruction, like someone who'd teach you to whittle while telling you stories about the good old days. Each candle came with a little card that told the story behind the scent, encouraging people to share their own memories. We weren't just selling candles anymore. We were selling connections to the past and permission to feel nostalgic without shame. The first weekend we brought the new line to the flea market, something magical happened. People didn't just smell the candles. They started sharing stories. A middle-aged man smelled Grandpa's Garage and spent 10 minutes telling us about learning to change oil with his father. A young woman bought 3 Library 82 candles because they reminded her of studying for finals in college. But it was Ellie's idea to start documenting these interactions that really changed our trajectory. She'd noticed how people's faces transformed when they connected with a scent, and she thought other people might want to see these moments of pure joy and recognition. So she started filming, not in an intrusive way, but casual videos of me reading from Grandma's notebook while people browse our candles, or conversations with customers about what certain scents meant to them. She had this natural ability to make people feel comfortable on camera, like they were just chatting with a friend instead of being recorded. The video that changed everything was almost an accident. It was a slow Tuesday afternoon at the flea market, and Ellie was filming me reading one of Grandma's more poetic entries about how scents could carry you home faster than any airplane. I was reading about a Saturday morning when Grandma was baking pie, and I was hiding under the kitchen table, pretending to read but really just listening to her hum while she worked. As I was reading, this elderly woman stopped at our table and started crying. Not sad crying, happy crying. She said the story reminded her of her own grandmother, who used to let her help roll pie crusts while sharing family gossip. She bought 4 candles and hugged us both before leaving. Ellie posted that video on TikTok with a caption, "When a stranger becomes family through scent and memory." Within 24 hours, it had 50,000 views. By the end of the week, it had over 4 million. The comments section was unlike anything I'd ever seen. People were sharing their own grandmother stories, tagging friends and family members, asking where they could buy our candles. Some comments made me laugh. I need this man to narrate my entire life, and this is like therapy but for my nose. Others made me cry. My grandma passed last month, and this made me feel close to her again. Suddenly, our little flea market operation was getting attention from all over the country. People were driving hours to find us, or begging us to ship candles to states we'd never even visited. That's when Ellie suggested we set up an Etsy shop. I'd barely figured out how to use email consistently, but Ellie understood the internet in a way that made me feel like I was watching magic happen. She created beautiful product photos, wrote descriptions that told stories, and set up a system for taking orders that actually made sense. We decided to start small, just 50 candles, the same 5 cents we've been selling at the market. We figured it might take a few weeks to sell them all. They sold out in 10 minutes. Not 10 hours. 10 minutes. I was sitting in my trailer, refreshing the page every 30 seconds, watching the inventory numbers drop like we were selling concert tickets to see Taylor Swift. Ellie was in her bus, handling customer service messages that were coming in faster than we could read them. By the end of that first day, we had over 300 messages from people begging us to restock, offering to pay double, or asking if we could create custom scents of their specific memories. That night, we sat outside our bus under a sky full of stars, drinking cheap wine and trying to process what had just happened. 24 hours earlier, we'd been small-time flea market vendors. Now, we were apparently running a business that people across the country were talking about. Ellie looked at me with this expression that was half excitement, half terror, and said something I'll never forget. I think we accidentally created something bigger than ourselves. She was right. The demand was overwhelming, but it wasn't just about candles. People were responding to the idea that their memories mattered, that nostalgia wasn't something to be embarrassed about, and that the scents of their childhood were worth preserving and celebrating. We spent the next 3 weeks working 18-hour days, making candles in both our spaces and trying to keep up with orders. My trailer became a shipping center. Ellie's bus became quality control headquarters. And somehow we managed to fill over 400 orders without completely losing our minds. Then the collaboration started. A YouTuber with 500,000 subscribers reached out, wanted to do a review video. A podcast about small businesses asked for an interview. A lifestyle blogger wanted to feature us in her Small Brands Making Big Impact series. Every piece of coverage brought more orders, more attention, and more pressure to scale up our operation. We were still mixing scents by hand, pouring wax in small batches, and packaging everything ourselves. It was sustainable for a hobby, but not for what we were becoming. The YouTube review was the tipping point. The creator, a woman who specialized in reviewing artisanal products, spent 15 minutes talking about our candles with the kind of genuine emotion that you can't fake. She lit each one, shared her own memories that they triggered, and ended the video by saying our candles were the most authentic product she reviewed all year. That video got over 100,000 views in the first week, and suddenly we weren't just a viral TikTok sensation. We were a legitimate business that people were taking seriously. The orders kept coming, faster than we could fulfill them, despite working every waking hour. We were making more money than I'd ever made in my life, but we were also drowning in our own success. That's when I started having panic attacks, not about the money or the success, but about whether we could maintain the quality and authenticity that had made people love us in the first place. Every order felt like a promise to recreate someone's most precious memories, and the weight of that responsibility was crushing. Ellie found me one evening, sitting in my trailer surrounded by shipping boxes, staring at a candle that had cooled wrong, and wondering if I was going to disappoint hundreds of people who trusted us with their nostalgia. She sat down next to me and did something that probably saved my sanity. She reminded me of something Grandma had written in her notebook. The best candles aren't perfect. They're made with love and the intention to bring joy. People can smell the difference. That's when we made the decision that defined everything that came after. Instead of trying to scale up by cutting corners or rushing production, we'd scale up by finding the right partners who understood what we were trying to accomplish. We started researching small manufacturers who specialize in handcrafted goods, looking for people who value quality over quantity and who wouldn't pressure us to compromise our vision for the sake of faster production. The breakthrough came through the most unexpected channel, grocery shopping. Ellie was buying organic vegetables at Whole Foods when she struck up a conversation with the local products manager. She mentioned what we were doing, showed him some photos of our candles, and told him about the response we'd been getting. He asked for samples. A week later, we got a call that I still can't quite believe actually happened. Whole Foods wanted to test our candles in 3 stores in the Austin area. If they sold well, they'd consider expanding to more locations. I had to sit down when Ellie told me we'd gone from selling 12 candles at a flea market to potentially being stocked in one of the most selective retail chains in the country. It felt like we'd skipped about 50 steps in the typical business development process. The Whole Foods buyer was a woman named Sarah who understood small brands and the importance of authentic stories. She wasn't interested in changing our scent or our packaging. She wanted us exactly as we were, because authenticity was what made us special. She did suggest we think about expanding our line and developing a more sustainable production process, but not in a way that felt pressuring. She was thinking long-term partnership, not quick profit. That night, Ellie and I sat outside her bus again, this time drinking actual good wine that we could finally afford, talking about the future in a way that felt both exciting and terrifying. 6 months earlier, I'd been a 35-year-old ranch hand with no prospects and no idea what I wanted to do with my life. Now I was co-running a business that was making people across the country cry happy tears and remember what home smelled like. Ellie looked at me in the glow of our apple barn morning candle and said something that made me understand how far we'd come. Your grandma would be so proud of you. She was right. Somewhere along the way, I'd stopped just trying to honor Grandma's memory and started creating something entirely new, something that was part her wisdom, part Ellie's insight, and part my own weird journey toward figuring out who I was supposed to be. As we sat there planning our next steps, surrounded by the sense that had changed our lives, I realized that the best partnerships aren't just about business. They're about finding someone who believes in your crazy dream and is willing to work just as hard as you are to make it real. And sometimes, if you're really lucky, they show up on a rainy day with lavender oil and the exact kind of courage you didn't know you needed. The road ahead was still uncertain. But for the first time in my life, I was excited about not knowing what came next. Because whatever it was, we'd figure out together, one perfectly scented candle at a time. You know that feeling when your side hustle accidentally becomes a real empire? That was me, standing in a lawyer's office signing papers to register Mabel's Light LLC, while trying not to hyperventilate about the fact that I was now officially responsible for other people's livelihoods. The Whole Foods trial run was like watching a controlled explosion. 3 stores, 100 candles, gone in 4 days. Suddenly my phone was ringing with calls from Crate and Barrel Anthropology and boutique stores I'd only dreamed of being in. The trailer operation wasn't going to cut it anymore. Finding our warehouse felt like destiny wearing work boots. An old auto repair shop in East Austin, sitting empty for 2 years, still smelling faintly of motor oil and abandoned dreams. Perfect rent, massive windows, and enough space to actually think about the future without having panic attacks. Jerry from a bike shop became our production manager because apparently fixing bicycles and managing candle manufacturing require the same obsessive attention to detail. Maria, Ellie's pottery friend, took over quality control with a kind of artistic eye that made every candle look like it belonged in a museum. And Frank, my trailer park neighbor who'd been watching our chaos with amusement, turned out to be a logistics wizard disguised as a retired veteran. Within 6 months, we were producing 500 candles a week and had revenue numbers that made my old ranch salary look like pocket change. But success brought vultures, investors wanting to maximize our market penetration, and companies offering buyouts that came with corporate restructuring plans that would get everything we'd built. Ellie and I had long conversations about staying true to our mission versus getting rich quick. We chose intentional growth over explosive scaling, quality over quantity, soul over stock options. Our YouTube channel, How Scent Changes Everything, became something unexpected. A documentary series about memory, nostalgia, and the universal human need to feel connected to home. Our most popular episode featured an elderly man talking about our sawdust and pipe tobacco, candle reminding him of his father's workshop. 20 minutes of pure emotion that had the comment section looking like a support group for father-son relationships. That's when I understood we weren't just selling candles. We were creating permission for people to honor their memories without shame. 2 years after leaving the ranch, I bought a house with a front porch. Small, perfect, and mine. When I asked Ellie to move in, she said yes before I finished the question. The proposal happened at our original flea market spot because I'm apparently genetically programmed to be sentimental. Same card table, same handwritten sign. Ellie thinking she was coming for a nostalgic photo shoot. Instead, she found me with a ring and a speech about partnerships that last forever. Planning the wedding while running a business was like juggling flaming candles, but we wanted something authentic. The ceremony would be in Ellie's herb garden, surrounded by the plants that had literally grown our success. I sent invitations to my entire family, not knowing what to expect. Mom called immediately, crying happy tears and asking what she could bring. Sarah started planning her maid of honor speech before I'd finished explaining the details. Jake and Tommy took longer to respond, but eventually both called with awkward congratulations and promises to behave themselves. They'd been following our YouTube channel, apparently, and were starting to understand that maybe their weird little brother hadn't lost his mind after all. The surprise came 3 days before the wedding when Dad called. Not Mom calling for him, not a message through Sarah, Dad himself, asking if the invitation was real and if he was actually welcome. I told him the truth. I wanted my whole family there, because this wasn't just about marrying Ellie. It was about celebrating the journey that had brought us all to this moment, including the parts that had been painful. Wedding day arrived with perfect weather, and the kind of nervous energy that comes from knowing your entire history is about to witness your future. Mom arrived early with enough food to feed an army, immediately bonding with Ellie's herb garden like she'd been waiting her whole life to discuss companion planting strategies. Sarah and her kids turned the getting ready process into a party, with my nephews running through the lavender rows while Sarah did Ellie's hair and told embarrassing stories about my childhood. Jake and Tommy showed up looking uncomfortable in actual dress shirts, but they hugged me like they meant it and told Ellie she was getting a weirdo, but a good one. Then, just as the ceremony was about to start, I saw him walking up the path. Dad, in his good suit, carrying a small wrapped package and looking like he was approaching a peace negotiation. What happened next was a conversation we should have had 2 years ago. He told me he'd been wrong about everything. The candles, what constituted real work, and trying to force me into a shape that never fit. He'd spent months watching our videos, reading customer comments, and trying to understand why strangers were writing essays about how our candles made them feel less alone. Then he handed me the package, another of Grandma's old molds he found in the farmhouse, along with a note that said she would be proud. So am I. I reached into my jacket and pulled out something I had made for this moment, even though I hadn't been sure he'd be there to receive it. Hayloft 1964. A candle based on his stories about summers helping his grandfather with farm work. Fresh hay, old leather, honest sweat, and the pride of work done right. I handed it to him with words that surprised us both. This is the scent of my respect for you. I was never angry. I was just growing. Dad held that candle like it was made of gold, and for the first time in my adult life, I saw him cry. Not sad tears, proud tears. The kind that come when you finally understand something important about someone you love. The ceremony itself was perfect chaos. Ellie walking through her garden like she was emerging from a fairy tale. Our friends and family surrounding us with the kind of love that makes you believe in magic, and vows that made everyone cry because they were honest instead of pretty. But it was seeing my whole family there, Dad in the front row holding his candle, Mom beaming like she'd personally arranged our happiness, Jake and Tommy actually listening instead of making jokes, and Sarah documenting everything with the dedication of a war correspondent. That made the day complete. 6 months later, we launched the Back Home collection with Mom's apron and pie crust as the flagship scent. Vanilla, cinnamon, and Sunday afternoon comfort food that made people call their mothers just to say thank you. It became our bestseller within a week. We opened a second facility in Pennsylvania, started shipping internationally, and launched Scents Like Home, a documentary series where we travel the country interviewing people about their personal connections to smell and memory. Each episode was proof that everyone's story matters and that the things reminding us of home deserve celebration. By year 3, we were generating $1.2 million in annual revenue, employing 15 people who felt like family, and selling in stores I'd once been too intimidated to shop in. Magazine features, conference speaking, awards for fastest growing small business. Success that felt surreal until I remembered it was built on something real. The moment that mattered most happened on a quiet Tuesday when Ellie told me she was pregnant. I immediately started working on Welcome Little One, candles capturing the sense of new beginnings. Fresh cotton, Morning sunshine, pure possibility made tangible. My way of preparing our home for the future, while honoring everyone who'd supported our journey with their stories. Baby Mabel arrived on a spring morning that smelled like jasmine and hope. Holding her, breathing in that perfect new life scent no candle could replicate, I understood something profound about our work. Every candle we'd made was part of preserving what matters most: love, memory, and the feeling of home. Now, 5 years later, our business continues growing while staying true to its mission: international partnerships, cultural preservation grants, and a foundation supporting small businesses focused on memory and tradition. But the best moment happens every evening when I come home to find Ellie reading to 5-year-old Mabel while candles flicker around them like guardians of happiness. Last night, after my girls were asleep, I sat holding Grandma's original mold, reflecting on the journey from scared ranch hand to successful entrepreneur. I lit our newest candle, designed to capture the feeling of being exactly where you belong, and looked out at the life we'd built. I thought about that broken-down trailer, the woman with lavender oil, the customers who trusted us with their nostalgia, the employees who helped us scale without losing our soul. Most of all, I thought about family, the one I was born into and the one I'd chosen. I realized something Grandma would have understood perfectly. I hadn't just built a business. I'd built a home, not just our house, but a sense of belonging that extends to everyone touched by our work. The scent of home isn't about a specific place or candle. It's about being surrounded by people who understand your story, support your dreams, and help you become who you were meant to be. Every candle carries that intention. Hope that when someone lights it, they'll remember what home feels like, wherever they are. As I sat in the gentle glow of our collective work, I whispered to Grandma. I kept the light burning. Now it's bright enough to guide other people home. The room filled with contentment, vanilla and possibility, lavender and love, something indefinable that smelled like dreams realized. I'd started looking for my place in the world, and ended up creating a place where others could find theirs. Success isn't just revenue or recognition. It's knowing your work matters, that your story helped others write theirs, and that the light you carry will burn long after you're gone. In the morning, I'll wake next to the woman who believed in my dream, check on the daughter who represents our future, and head to the warehouse where our team turns wax into memories and connections. But tonight, surrounded by candles that smell like home, I'm exactly where I belong. For a guy who spent most of his life feeling like he didn't fit anywhere, that's the most beautiful scent of all. The light Grandma started became something bigger than we imagined. Not just a candle company, but proof that home isn't a place you find. It's a feeling you create, one small flame at a time.